Let's bring back somebody who you should have seen earlier, Dr. Joseph Tucker, Enveric, CEO. There he is. Dr. Tucker, how are we doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. I see your slides. Going to bring them up on the screen. There they are.
Awesome.
We already know a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about Enveric.
Awesome. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. And yeah, great to be here at this conference. Certainly an awesome conference. Great venue you guys put on. So let me just jump straight in. Everyone, I'm Dr. Joseph Tucker, the CEO of Enveric Bioscience. So yeah, let me just jump right into it. We only have 20 minutes and it's pretty exciting. So let me just start right off the bat. What separates, what differentiates Enveric from honestly everyone else in this space. And we're talking about the psychedelic medicine space primarily. And I think it's, right here at the top, we've got this platform that we've put together. So it's synthetic biology, it's artificial intelligence, and to put these two things together and enable us to really create and grab this very extensive portfolio of next generation psychedelics, which I think is really key. And it's where this whole sector is going. So I'll explain in a minute, but remember that, right? So our core asset is this drug creation engine. And it's really important in the psychedelic sector. We're creating molecules, new molecules that no one's been able to create before. And that gives us very strong intellectual property because it's composition of matter, number one. And number two, because it's very broad. This engine allows us to go after really a lot of white space that exists in the field right now. And, it's not going to last forever. So it's important that we capture it while we can. And this leads to really the ability for us. It opens up numerous possible markets for us to go after, each with a distinct optimized drug. So it's really, it's a great big opportunity, a great big idea, if you will. But at the same time, we also know, you can't boil the ocean. You got to be laser focused. Yes, be patient centric, but you also have to be investor centric. And that requires really having a laser focus on those fields, those indications, those drugs that are going to get you to market fastest with the greatest success. And so for us, that's cancer patients, as I'll explain. Now, one of the things that I'm most proud of is this management team that really in a very short time, we managed to pull together. This company has really been listed only for a year now, not quite a year on the NASDAQ. And already we have this management and this board that's really full of folks with 20, 30, 40 years experience in drug development. And really, they're all thought leaders in the area that they're responsible for. Like Peter Ficini, a leading scientist in synthetic biology for, close to 30 years. And, I could call people out, but what we've got here are drug developers, folks that have been at, Mallinckrodt, Baxter, BMS, Wyeth, all kinds of drug development experience. So these folks, they know what good looks like. They know what a good drug is. They know how to get the job done. So I'm super, super happy with this team that I get to work with, my colleagues and peers. So let me just, give you the investment thesis right off the top, right? A small number of bullet points. If you remember nothing else, try to remember this, right? So the first thing, this drug discovery, this creation engine I mentioned, it's a combination of synthetic biology and chemistry. That's a combination that has really very rarely been put together before. That allows us to create this massive diversity in molecules, new drug candidates in both psychedelics and cannabinoids, which is meaningful. I think we're the only company on the NASDAQ with drug development programs in both psychedelics and cannabinoids. Now, we've filed about 14 patents so far, covering literally a lot more than 1 million possible drug candidates, which is huge. And as I mentioned, we've got this very experienced team. One of the key adds to this whole thing, how do you turn this massive portfolio possible of drugs into drugs? And one of the things you have to do is quickly parse through it, sort through it. And that's where we've brought artificial intelligence in, very specific. There's a lot of people using AI for a lot of different things. But for us, it's very much about accelerating that drug development process. This leads us to multi-billion-dollar opportunities. And, as one of only 5 NASDAQ traded companies in the psychedelic space with 20 million cash. And like I said, we just got started. In fact, only 2 weeks ago, two companies came together, Enveric Bio and Magic Med, which I was the CEO of. Only 2 weeks ago did we come together to really enable this platform. So we're really right at the very beginning of what I think is going to be a very exciting story. So where's our clinical assets? Everybody wants to know. Okay, so right now, disclosed, our first product, EV101. This is a cannabinoid-based product for glioblastoma. It's we got the green light for phase 1. It's going to start this year or this quarter, Q4. We expect first patients in. EV102, that's another cannabinoid product for radiation dermatitis. I'll explain a little more in a moment. The late preclinical IND submission is up next in Q2 of next year. And then very exciting, our first novel psychedelic molecule, EVM201 for cancer-related distress. And this is a very carefully chosen indication. We're in late discovery. We should be moving into preclinical very soon by Q1 of 2022. So the way we look at this is, we call ourselves next generation treatments. And a lot of that comes from what we're doing in the psychedelic space, really pioneering, I think, a lot of the Gen 2 and Gen 3 psychedelics. And it opens up a lot of different markets that we put windows or boxes around them, I suppose, and say, treating the mind and treating the body. And it sounds like a motherhood statement, but it's very, if you pardon the pun, mindful. And that is, in many cases, in particular, cancer-related distress, our top psychedelic indication, if you are able to address the mental aspects, cancer-related distress, I think it's been pretty well established that very often has a positive impact on the physical aspects of a patient's, success going through chemo, for example. And by the same token, on the body side of the equation, where we have both cannabinoid products and non-hallucinogenic psychedelic products in development, in that case, again, you have a situation where, so radiodermatitis, scratchy, itchy, leads to depression in a lot of patients. If you can address the physical aspect, it will have very often a positive benefit on the mental aspect. So we really do see the two as connected and synergistic. But as I said, we can't boil the ocean. Yes, there's a lot of big markets, but where are we going to make our first stand? And that's in these two twin indications on the psychedelic, the mental side, and the cannabinoid, the body side. So on the psychedelic side, cancer-related distress, I think many of us have probably heard about it. Canada made a lot of international headlines as they were allowing psilocybin to be used for cancer-related distress. So, 70% of cancer patients have mental health challenges. Not surprising, anxiety, depression, PTSD. 10 million plus patients every year are looking at this, are facing this. It's a $20 billion market opportunity. Could be more. On the radiodermatitis side, now we're talking our cannabinoid side. And what are we looking at here? Again, half of cancer patients go through radiation treatment. The vast majority of those end up with radiation dermatitis, and the standard of care is very poor, easily $1 billion market. So these are our two lead indications, with lots more, of course, to come behind it. So for those of you that aren't up to speed on the psychedelics, let me just give you a little bit of the market and investor validation for the sector. J&J's Spravato, of course, really pioneered this, broke the first ground, getting Spravato esketamine through. That's already a $3 billion anticipated peak sales market. Meanwhile, the regulators are getting behind psychedelics, FDA granting breakthrough status for several drugs, clinical trials around the world. And even on the investor side, we're starting to see very sophisticated, patient, long-term life science investors are starting. Some of the biggest names out there are moving into some of these big NASDAQ listed companies, the other companies that are out there on the NASDAQ. So there's really already a lot of validation for the psychedelic sector. And so here's just a very brief, a little tutorial just for my nomenclature. I use Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3. So what does that mean? Mental health right now, the drug side of it, treated with things like SSRIs, really not that great. About half the patients across the board feel like they need something better. classic psychedelics, the LSD, the magic mushrooms, MDMA has really got a lot of excitement right now. And that's using these old classic, in many cases sourced from nature molecules as an adjunct to psychotherapy. It boosts the benefit of psychotherapy. That's Gen 1. Gen 2 now is saying, can I modify that classic psychedelic? Can I get around some of the side effects? But at the end of the day, it becomes the same molecule once a patient ingests it. And then Gen 3, that's the really exciting, sky's the limit kind of space. Can I get inspired by these psychedelics, but make much more significant changes to the structure and have much more improved outcomes for the patients, which actually changes the delivery model, as I'll explain in a second. So all three, Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, they're all very exciting. They all have a place. We, of course, are interested in all the generations, but our focus is on Gen 2 and Gen 3. So let me just explain very briefly, what's the constraint here? The thing with Gen 1 and Gen 2, which are really enablers or assists, let's say, to psychotherapy, it's really a psychotherapy treatment getting a boost. And so there's a lot of constraints. There's first off, you have to have two professionals with you in the room. There's a series of treatments you have to go through. You have to control the set and setting. And there's a lot of other, a lot of patients are screened out, are deemed to be unlikely to respond well to psychotherapy or don't want to take a psychedelic as part of their treatment regimen. So you end up losing a lot of patients that need help. The Gen 3 model now, that's where you take it to the next level. Now, if you can remove some of those constraining, some of those patient restricting side effects, like hallucinations, maybe, for example, or, there's actually quite a few potential side effects that you could potentially remove and open up the number of patients that you get to. What if you just make it last longer? For example, it turns out to be a very big market opportunity if you can do that. So Gen 3, I think, is the target, the ultimate goal for the pharma industry. So here at Enveric, as I mentioned, we do have this one core asset, which is this ability to create this very large diversity of new drug candidates. So how do we do it? Why are we able to do it and others aren't? And it has to do with combining synthetic biology and chemistry. And very briefly, chemistry has been used for hundreds of years. It's how you normally make drugs. Sometimes chemical reactions are difficult, so you can turn to nature, get enzymes from nature that do those chemical reactions. If you put those two together, now you can make, as we are demonstrating, a very large number of molecules that no one could make before. That gives you a huge diversity to choose from to find exactly the right drug. And, great question. Why do you need to choose? Why can't you just use magic mushrooms? Isn't that going to cure all mental health issues? And I think, we all recognize that's not the case. That, so think of it like this. A drug is basically, it's a key that you're trying to stick into a lock in the patient to get a result. And so if you can tailor that drug, if you can change the teeth on the key that you're sticking into that lock, as we all know, you change the teeth on a key and it totally changes how the key works when you stick it in the lock, whether or not it even works at all. So that's the idea behind diversity. If you can modify, as we've done, the core key, the core molecule, modify the little decorations on the outside, the teeth, you can now make, first off, millions of possible drugs, and they're novel. You can file patents on them and own them, and you have this large diversity to choose from to get exactly the right drug for each indication that you're trying to treat. But it then creates a second challenge for you, which is, great, we're making millions of possible drugs, but which is the right one? And so, it's a benefit and it's a challenge, right? And that's where our second key asset, our second key part of our platform, which we call PsyAI, for Psychedelics Artificial Intelligence, that basically enables us to take these millions of possible drugs and sort them for all the characteristics we're looking for, not just your standard drug characteristics, but also things like, is it likely to cause hallucinations? Is it likely to make the patient feel more open to changing their view or their emotional state? Those kinds of things. A lot of nuance can be plugged into a model like that to ultimately end up at your ideal drug. And so for us, AI, again, is a real game-changing technology. It allows us to save massive amounts of time and massive amounts of money that otherwise would have been spent in preclinical development testing all these molecules. And it also brings us to a very high degree of confidence that we've identified exactly the right drug for each different mental health indication that we're pursuing. So I only want to mention the industry landscape just briefly, just to point out a couple of the other companies in the space. Again, there's about a handful, half a dozen that are trading on the NASDAQ or in one case, the New York Stock Exchange. Great companies. We're fans of everything that everybody's doing. Really, it's a lot of great folks in the industry. I just want to draw your attention, though. You notice there's a lot of competition going on Gen 1. You see the column there. Vast majority of the companies are really focusing on the Gen 1, which is highly competitive, hard to patent protect. And the big upside, likely, I think most of us recognize, is going to come from Gen 2 and Gen 3. So, while we are also interested in Gen 1, Gen 2 and Gen 3 is where we're making our largest bets, and that's where I think the biggest upside is, and frankly, the biggest opportunity still in the sector. So I'll talk just briefly about the cannabinoid side of the business. I think it's been well established that cannabinoids, thanks to the human endocannabinoid system, have a lot of possible effects, which is great, except, well, there's a lot of possible effects, so there's actually a lot of possible side effects. So, the question we ask ourselves is, how do you get the best benefit and avoid the side effects? One of the approaches, and the approach we're taking, is by administration, by using the route of administration and approaching the CB2 receptors on the skin. We can do topical administration and avoid all these systemic effects. So that allows us to target anti-inflammation and pain. So pain and inflammation as the targets. Now, the data supporting this comes from, of course, internally, but also a lot of, this was one of the benefits of working in this space. A lot of institutions, a lot of very good scientists have demonstrated over and over again the anti-inflammatory properties of cannabinoids, in particular CBD. Question has always been, how do you isolate that and how do you maximize that without side effects? So that's what we're doing. So again, remind you, the issue on radiation dermatitis is a very large number of patients get radiation treatment, get radiation dermatitis, have this burning and itching and pain that leads to depression, and yet the current standard of care, very simple creams and ointments, that it really insufficient. Something a lot better is needed. Now we're turning it around. We're bringing cannabinoids directly to the skin in the right formulation to get what we're after. So clinically, where's that at? The IND is going to be filed Q2 of 2022. We've already got the protocol on site figured out. Phase 1 study is going to start early of the second half of next year. So what's the foundation of Enveric? I think again, it's a new company. We're just getting out there, just listed on the NASDAQ as Enveric December 2020. Magic Med, the psychedelics company, just joined 2 weeks ago, and yet we've got 20 million cash on hand. We have already 2 analysts are covering us, and being listed on the NASDAQ really puts us in a very strong position to build from. It's a great foundation going forward. So I'm pretty excited about what we're going to be able to do. And on that note, just a few of the catalysts and milestones that we're pursuing in the near term. I think it's going to be really exciting for anybody interested in psychedelic drugs. Where can that take us? And cannabinoid drugs. So first off, we're going to move our first psychedelic drug out of early drug discovery into preclinical very soon. And a lot of that is thanks to the power of Psy-AI that we've been able to, deploy on our large portfolio of molecules. We call them the Cyberry, by the way. And so Q4, right around the corner, we'll be announcing moving out of early drug discovery. Our first drug in clinic, EV101, Q4 2021. Our second drug in clinic, the radiodermatitis, IND should be filed Q2 of next year. First patient Q3. And that exciting first new drug in cancer-related distress, psychedelic molecule, preclinical studies Q1 2022, and of course, moving quickly after that. And the last thing is, remember I said how important, and pay attention to this one, right? Intellectual property is so important in the psychedelic sector, because so many of the molecules being looked at right now, Gen 1, very difficult to put patent protection around. And I think everybody recognizes that the pharma industry is most interested in novel molecules that can be patent protected. So we have a strong portfolio. We're going to continue to add to that through 2022, making that one of our other really powerful assets in the company. So with that, I think I'll stop. I'm not sure how much time I have left, probably about 15 seconds. But I wanted to thanks for your attention and the opportunity to tell you the story today.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph Tucker, CEO of Enveric, again on the NASDAQ under the ticker ENVB. Dr. Tucker, have a great rest of your day.